As a specialist in missing persons cases, I've studied hundreds of disappearances that have haunted families and communities for decades. But the case of the Grimes sisters presents patterns that defy conventional understanding and challenge everything we know about predatory behavior. After years of analysis, combining modern forensic psychology with archived evidence, I believe I've uncovered critical insights that previous investigators missed. This is the story of Barbara and Patricia Grimes, two young girls whose movie night became one of Chicago's most enduring mysteries. December 28, 1956, the Brighton Theater in Chicago's South Side was showing Elvis Presley's Love Me Tender for what would be the final week of its run. For 15-year-old Barbara Grimes and her 13-year-old sister Patricia, this wasn't just another movie night. They were devoted Elvis fans, and this would be their 11th time seeing the film. What their mother Loretta didn't know was that this ordinary Friday evening would mark the beginning of a nightmare that would consume Chicago for weeks and leave questions that remain unanswered nearly 70 years later. The sisters left their home at 3634 South Damon Avenue around 7:30 p.m., carrying enough money for tickets, popcorn, and bus fare home. They were expected back by midnight, a reasonable curfew for two responsible teenagers in a close-knit neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's business. But midnight came and went. Then 1 a.m., then dawn. The Grimes sisters had vanished without a trace. What makes this case particularly disturbing from a criminological perspective is the complete absence of transitional evidence. In most abduction cases, we find what I call departure indicators. Witnesses who saw the victims with unknown individuals, reports of suspicious vehicles, or signs of struggle. But Barbara and Patricia Grimes simply evaporated into the winter night, leaving behind only the memory of two girls who loved Elvis Presley and trusted their familial neighborhood. The initial police response followed standard protocols for missing teenagers in 1956. Detectives assumed the girls had run away, perhaps to see Elvis perform in person. This assumption would prove to be the first of many critical errors that would plague the investigation. As a behavioral analyst, I can tell you that runaways typically exhibit specific patterns. They take personal belongings, leave notes, or confide in friends about their plans. The Grimes sisters did none of these things. They left behind their most precious possessions, including Barbara's diary and Patricia's collection of Elvis memorabilia. The case took on national significance when Sheriff Joseph Lohman announced a massive search effort involving over 200 police officers, volunteers, and even members of the National Guard. The Chicago Police Department received over 1,700 tips and leads, each one meticulously followed up and documented. Yet as the days turned into weeks, the trail remained cold. The media attention was unprecedented for a missing persons case, with newspapers across the country following every development. But here's where the case becomes truly puzzling from a criminological standpoint. Multiple credible witnesses reported seeing the sisters alive days and even weeks after their disappearance. A restaurant owner claimed he served them hamburgers 3 days after they vanished. A bus driver insisted he saw them on his route nearly a week later. These weren't casual glimpses. These were extended interactions with people who knew the girls by sight. If you're as fascinated by these unexplained details as I am, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Cases like the Grimes sisters demonstrate why we need to continue examining cold cases with fresh perspectives and modern investigative techniques. You won't want to miss the shocking revelation I'm about to share about what really happened during those missing weeks. The sightings created what behavioral analysts call temporal displacement, a phenomenon where the timeline of events becomes so confused that establishing facts becomes nearly impossible. In my experience, this usually indicates either systematic deception by witnesses or something far more sinister. The most significant sighting came from a restaurant owner named Frank Salerno, who claimed the sisters visited his establishment multiple times during the first week of January 1957. He described them as appearing tired and frightened, always accompanied by two older men who seemed controlling and possessive. His account is particularly compelling because it aligns with what we know about human trafficking patterns. The girls' appearance, disheveled, fearful, always supervised, suggests they were being held against their will. The fact that they were seen in public repeatedly indicates their captors were confident they wouldn't or couldn't escape. This behavior pattern is consistent with experienced predators who use psychological manipulation rather than physical restraint. The investigation took a dramatic turn when a drifter named Benny Bedwell confessed to killing the sisters. Bedwell was a career criminal with a history of violence, and his confession seemed to answer the community's desperate need for closure. He claimed he had picked up the girls hitchhiking and killed them when they refused his advances. But as a criminologist, I find Bedwell's confession deeply problematic. First, his account of the murders changed multiple times during interrogation. He provided different locations, different methods, and different motives. This inconsistency is typical of false confessions, often given by individuals seeking attention or trying to avoid punishment for other crimes. Second, Bedwell's description of the sisters' behavior didn't match their known personalities. Barbara and Patricia were cautious, well-supervised children who had never shown any inclination toward risky behavior like hitchhiking. Most importantly, Bedwell's confession was later recanted, and he was never charged with the murders. The fact that experienced detectives couldn't corroborate his story despite having a willing confessor suggests the real perpetrator was still at large. This pattern, false confessions followed by recantations, is common in high-profile cases where public pressure demands quick resolution. The discovery of the bodies on January 22, 1957, raised more questions than it answered. The sisters were found in a remote area of Willow Springs, about 25 miles from their last known location. What shocked investigators was the condition of the bodies. Despite being missing for almost a month in harsh Chicago winter conditions, the remains showed signs of having been kept elsewhere and recently deposited at the discovery site. The coroner's report revealed details that have never been fully explained. The girls' bodies showed no signs of sexual assault, which immediately ruled out the most common motive for child abduction. There were no obvious signs of violence or trauma that would indicate a struggle. The cause of death was listed as exposure, but the lack of decomposition suggested they had died recently, not weeks earlier. This forensic evidence creates what I call the temporal paradox of the Grimes case. If the sisters died shortly before their bodies were discovered, where were they during the missing weeks? If they died earlier, why were the bodies so well preserved? The physical evidence suggests they were kept somewhere warm and dry, then moved to the discovery location shortly before being found. The investigation revealed several suspects who were never adequately investigated. A local businessman named Silas Jane, who owned property near where the bodies were found, had connections to organized crime and a history of violence. However, his political connections and wealth seemed to shield him from serious scrutiny. This pattern of protected suspects is unfortunately common in cases involving powerful individuals. Another suspect was a carnival worker named Max Fleeg, who had been in the Chicago area during the time of the disappearance. Fleeg had a history of child molestation and had been questioned in similar cases across the Midwest. He fled Chicago shortly after the bodies were discovered, but was never pursued by authorities. This failure to follow up on obvious leads suggests either incompetence or deliberate obstruction. The case also revealed troubling aspects of 1950s investigative techniques. The crime scene was contaminated by curious onlookers and inadequately secured by police. Potential evidence was lost or destroyed. Witness interviews were conducted without proper documentation. These procedural failures made it impossible to build a coherent case against any suspect. The level of investigative incompetence in this case is staggering by modern standards. If you're interested in how criminal investigations have evolved over the decades, make sure to like this video and check out our other true crime analysis. We examine how cases like the Grimes sisters help shape modern forensic techniques and why some mysteries remain unsolved despite advances in technology. From a behavioral perspective, the Grimes case exhibits characteristics of what I call institutional predation, crimes committed by individuals with enough social standing or connections to avoid serious investigation. The multiple suspects with powerful connections, the conflicting witness statements, and the inadequate police response all suggest a systematic effort to prevent the truth from emerging. The psychological profile of the perpetrator based on the available evidence suggests someone with local knowledge, access to secure locations, and enough social standing to avoid suspicion. The fact that the sisters were kept alive for weeks indicates either genuine emotional attachment or the perpetrator's need to maintain a facade of normalcy. This is consistent with what we know about sociopathic behavior in positions of authority. The impact on the Chicago community was profound and lasting. Parents who had previously allowed their children considerable freedom suddenly became overprotective. The sense of safety that had characterized suburban life in the 1950s was permanently shattered. Churches organized prayer vigils, schools implemented new safety protocols, and families began to question whether their neighborhoods were as safe as they had believed. The case also highlighted the limitations of law enforcement in the 1950s. The Chicago Police Department was overwhelmed by the scale of the investigation and lacked the resources and expertise to handle such a complex case. The FBI's involvement was limited by jurisdictional issues and the assumption that this was a local crime rather than a federal matter. One of the most disturbing aspects of the case is how quickly it was forgotten by official channels. Despite the massive investigation and public attention, the case was quietly closed without resolution. The official files were sealed, and investigators moved on to other cases. This pattern of abandonment is unfortunately common in cases involving child victims, particularly when the investigation becomes politically inconvenient. The advent of modern forensic techniques has provided new insights into the case. DNA analysis, if properly applied to preserved evidence, could potentially identify the perpetrator or at least rule out suspects. Advanced geographical profiling could narrow down possible locations where the girls were held. Psychological profiling techniques developed since the 1950s could provide a more accurate picture of the perpetrator's characteristics. However, the biggest obstacle to solving the case remains the same institutional resistance that hampered the original investigation. Key evidence has been lost or destroyed. Witness statements have disappeared from files. The crime scene has been altered beyond recognition. These aren't accidental oversights. They represent a systematic effort to ensure this case remains unsolved. The Grimes sisters case also fits into a broader pattern of child disappearances in the Chicago area during the 1950s. At least 6 other children vanished under similar circumstances during this same time period. The similarities: children from working-class families, inadequate investigations, powerful suspects who escape scrutiny, suggest a coordinated effort by individuals who understood how to exploit weaknesses in the system. I'm curious about your perspective on cases like this. Do you think small-town corruption and cover-ups still happen today, or have modern investigative techniques made such institutional failures impossible? Drop a comment below and let me know what city or town you're watching from. I'd love to hear if you've encountered similar unsolved cases in your area. And please share this video with anyone who might be interested in true crime analysis. The case has taken on an almost mythical quality in Chicago folklore. Local residents still speak of the Grimes sisters in hushed tones, particularly around the anniversary of their disappearance. The Brighton Theater, where the girls saw their final movie, has been demolished, but the lot remains empty, an informal monument to 2 young lives cut short. Several books and documentaries have attempted to solve the case, each proposing different theories and suspects. However, most of these investigations have been hampered by the same institutional resistance that plagued the original inquiry. Key figures refuse to be interviewed, files remain sealed, and potential witnesses have died without sharing their knowledge. The psychological impact on the surviving family members cannot be understated. Loretta Grimes, the sister's mother, spent the rest of her life searching for answers. She maintained correspondence with investigators, journalists, and amateur sleuths, hoping someone would finally uncover the truth. Her dedication to finding justice for her daughters represents the kind of determination that keeps cold cases alive in public consciousness. The case also raised important questions about media coverage of missing children. The intense publicity surrounding the Grimes sisters helped maintain public interest, but also created a circus atmosphere that may have hampered the investigation. The balance between public awareness and investigative integrity remains a challenge in high-profile cases. Modern criminologists studying the case have identified several red flags that were ignored by original investigators. The pattern of sightings, the condition of the bodies, the suspect with powerful connections. These elements form a coherent picture of institutional cover-up that investigators in 1957 either couldn't or wouldn't recognize in the 1957. The emergence of social media and amateur detective communities has brought new attention to the case. Online forums dedicated to cold cases have generated new theories and uncovered previously unknown connections. While some of these efforts have been helpful, they've also created additional confusion and conspiracy theories that make separating fact from speculation increasingly difficult. The Grimes case serves as a case study in how social class and connections can influence criminal investigations. The victims were from a working-class family with limited political influence. The suspects included wealthy businessmen and politically connected individuals. This disparity in social power created an environment that justice was systematically denied. From a psychological perspective, the case demonstrates how trauma can affect entire communities. The fear and uncertainty generated by the disappearance and murder of 2 innocent children created lasting changes in how Chicago residents viewed their safety and security. The ripple effects of that trauma continue to influence the community decades later. The legal implications of the case have also been significant. The inadequate investigation and failure to prosecute obvious suspects helped drive reforms in police procedures and evidence handling. While these changes came too late to help Barbara and Patricia Grimes, they potentially prevented similar failures in subsequent cases. One of the most disturbing aspects of the case is how close investigators came to solving it. Multiple witnesses provided detailed accounts of the sisters' activities during their missing weeks. Physical evidence pointed to specific locations and suspects. The pieces of the puzzle were all there, but institutional resistance prevented them from being assembled into a coherent picture. The case also highlights the importance of preserving evidence and maintaining detailed records. Many of the files related to the Grimes investigation have been lost or destroyed over the decades. This loss of evidence makes it almost impossible to conduct a thorough modern investigation, even with advanced forensic techniques. The psychological profile of the perpetrator, based on available evidence, suggests someone with significant resources and connections who was able to maintain a facade of respectability while committing horrific crimes. This type of predator is particularly dangerous because they use their social position to avoid suspicion and manipulate investigations. The failure to solve the Grimes case has had lasting implications for how missing children cases are handled. The publicity generated by the investigation helped establish protocols for immediate response to child disappearances. However, it also demonstrated how quickly cases can become political hot potatoes that are abandoned when they become inconvenient. As we reach the end of this analysis, it's important to remember that Barbara and Patricia Grimes were more than just victims in a famous case. They were young girls with hopes, dreams, and futures that were cut short by someone who has never been held accountable. Barbara loved to write and dreamed of becoming a journalist. Patricia was an excellent student who wanted to become a teacher. Their potential was stolen not just by their killer, but by a system that failed to deliver justice. The case remains officially unsolved, though many of the original investigators privately believe they knew the identity of the perpetrator. The passage of time has made prosecution impossible, but the search for truth continues. Modern forensic techniques, combined with renewed public interest, may finally provide the answers that have eluded investigators for nearly 70 years. The Grimes sisters' case serves as a reminder that justice delayed is often justice denied. The failure to solve this case represents not just a personal tragedy for one family, but a systemic failure that allowed a predator to escape accountability. It's a cautionary tale about the importance of thorough investigation, institutional integrity, and the courage to pursue justice regardless of who might be implicated. The legacy of Barbara and Patricia Grimes lives on in the countless missing children who have been found because of lessons learned from their case. Their story has inspired investigators, journalists, and activists to continue fighting for justice even when the odds seem unsurmountable. In that sense, their brief lives continue to make a difference in the world. The mystery of what happened during those missing weeks in January 1957 may never be fully resolved, but the impact of their story on their community, on investigative procedures, and on public awareness of child safety ensures that Barbara and Patricia Grimes will not be forgotten. Their case remains a testament to the importance of never giving up the search for truth, no matter how much time has passed or how powerful the forces arrayed against justice might be. Today, nearly 70 years after that fateful movie night, the Grimes sisters' case continues to fascinate and frustrate investigators. It stands as one of Chicago's most enduring mysteries, a puzzle with pieces that seem to fit together but never quite form a complete picture. Perhaps that's the most disturbing aspect of all. Not that we don't know who killed Barbara and Patricia Grimes, but that we probably never will. The truth died with the perpetrator, leaving behind only questions, theories, and the memory of two young girls who loved Elvis Presley and trusted their neighborhood to keep them safe. The case of the Grimes sisters reminds us that evil can hide behind respectable facades, that justice is not always served, and that some mysteries may be too dangerous to solve. But it also reminds us of the importance of never forgetting, never giving up, and never allowing tragedy to silence the search for truth. Barbara and Patricia Grimes deserve better from the system that was supposed to protect them. The least we can do is ensure their story continues to be told, their memory honored, and their quest for justice never abandoned.